Oh, Aaron, was Herzach? You ready?
Yes, great.
Okay, let's begin. So we're here on Daf Vov. You know how the way it works on the Lekutei Torah is Daf Vov is there's Amud Aleph, Amud Beis, Amud Gimel, Amud Daled, and here we're on Amud Daled. So here we go. The pasuk from Shir Hashirim that the Alter Rebbe quotes is Shechora ani Venovo, V'neis Yerushalayim, Kol Kedar Kiriyas Shloimeh. So last week in the maimer, I'm going to put on headphones so it'll improve the sound hopefully. Just a moment. Okay, I hope that's better. Amir Hashem. You hear me?
It's all good.
Okay. So last week in the maimer, in the last maimer, we learned about the white fire and the black fire. And it seems that this is a big theme in Shir Hashirim, that we talk about like this contrast between black and white. So here in the pasuk, there's one young woman speaking to another young woman, and the young woman says, "Shechora ani," that I'm blackened, but Venovo, I'm beautiful, and it's being said to B'nai Yerushalayim. And then it says, "Ohale Kedar." Ohale Kedar are like blackened, a tent that's black, or like sometimes the pasuk will refer to it like when the heavens are dark with a cloud. So it'll say like Ohale Kedar, or there's a pasuk in Tehillim, Al Bishamayim Kadrus. So Kadrus means that it's black, right? It's a black sky. So there's Ohale Kedar. And there's Yeriyos Shloimeh. Now the Yeriyos of Shloimeh HaMelech were pure white, beautiful white. So it's like there's a black, the outer side of the curtains are black, and inside they're pure white. So it seems that that's the illusion, that it's saying that what am I like? You see me black. But really, inside, I'm beautifully white. So the Alter Rebbe, to me, it's a very special maimer. The Alter Rebbe is speaking. It's very, very subtle. It's very gentle. The message of the Alter Rebbe. So he says like this: Hine, B'nai Yerushalayim. Who are the B'nai Yerushalayim? They're nikroyim haneshamis shadayin lo yordu lo'elam hazeh. Before the neshamas come down into this world, we're on page 12. Yeah, before the neshamas come down to this world, they're called B'nai Yerushalayim. What happens with them at that state? They're still one with Hashem. Now I want to mention something that in Chassidus we always go back to what the Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya and what's Bechal, the Dover Yodua, that the name of every item or every object, it personifies the Inyan. Like when it says that Adam Arishan called names to all the Chayes, Vayikra Adam Shemes. So Chassidus explains that it's not Pashut like, oh, he just came up with a bunch of names, but he recognized the shoyrish haneshama, the nefesh, the life of every. So he understood what's the right name to give. It's an incredible insight into the makeup of all these animals. So here, when we refer to the Yidden and they have a name. What is their name? B'nai Yerushalayim. So it's not stam a cute name, but it personifies their essence. Who are they? They're B'nai Yerushalayim. What does that mean? B'nai Yerushalayim. So he says it's referring to the neshamas before they come into a guf. And v'oidon kolulois b'matzilam baruchu. They're completely one. They're completely bottled to Hashem. They're transparent. They don't have their own existence. And he says an interesting thing. He says, V'nikra, what is the neshama called before the neshama comes down into this world? It's already a neshama. But we say neshama shenasata bi tahirahi, and then after tahira ataverasa. Ataverasa, you created it, so it didn't exist before, right? Barasa, yitzarta, nefachta, those are the levels, the way it comes down into this world. So in the state of tahira, it wasn't yet barasa.
So
it's ayin. It had an identity, but it's an ayin identity. It's completely transparent.
It's in this week's parsha, Dvarim, maimer. Just heard it today.
Yeah, he also brings out this nakuda. Yeah. So he says, "V'achakach adayin hi b'bchinas ayin, v'achakach ata barasa yesh me'ayin." Then it comes into existence. The word tahir, purity, also refers to this inyan of transparency, right? Like when you look into the sky, what does the pasuk say? Uche'etzem hashamayim latoihar. Right? You remember that pasuk? Uche'etzem hashamayim latoihar. It's transparent, like looking into the sky. I'm not talking about what the Rambam says that in great height, so it looks blue. But Etzem hashamayim latoihar. Where is that pasuk? Etzem hashamayim latoihar. One second. I mean, it's not Etzem hashamayim latoihar. Yeah. When it says that the Yidden had a Suda with Yisroi after Yisroi came, and they looked up at the heavens and they saw like a sapphire stone with beauty, and it was crystal, like clear. And there it says the Lashon, Etzem hashamayim latoihar. So that's the inyan of Tahira, that it's transparent. It doesn't have a metzius. It says, Lafi shekol neshama is tera miridasam leila mazeh. All the neshama is heim deis sham bebitul. And they're in a state of iskalus, mamish be'erin sov baruch hu, they're mamish, one with Hashem. What does it say about Eliyahu? Anovi chai Hashem asher amadeti lefanov, that I stood before him. V'loi Eliyahu belvad ela kol neshamas kedem yiridasan v'slabshusan beguf. The nefesh habaham is before they come into this world, and when they're vested in a body, then they're bottled completely. V'azai nikru b'nois Yerushalayim. So I'll tell you this: this maimer, I when we started Shir Hashirim, I mentioned that the Alter Rebbe has many maamorim on Shir Hashirim. I mean, there are volumes, and this maimer, different aspects of the maimer are discussed across many maamorim. And one of the things that the Alter Rebbe writes in a different maimer with Chai Hashem Asher Amadati Lefonov, I stood before him. He says, Amadati Lefonov, that's this. When we talk about Benois Yerushalayim, that's the neshama when it's in the state of Ibur. Before a neshama comes down to this world, the neshama itself goes through, just like the body goes through, from the tipa until it becomes a body, there's a process that happens in the mother's womb. So too, during that time, the neshama is in a process of development. It's going through hishtalshalus, and it's becoming prepared to come down into Olam Haza Agashmi. And so when Malchus, the neshama, the origin of neshama is Malchus da Atzilus. And when there's that moment that from Malchus da Atzilus, the neshama goes into the state of Ibur, that's when it becomes Asher Amadati Lefanov. So out of the Eitzer HaNeshama, the neshama is, we have to understand, through the hashpah of the male, right, through Hashem's infusion, a spark leaves the Eitzer HaNeshamas and it becomes distinct, and then it's in a state of Ibur, for whatever the tkufa is. Now, Eliyahu, Chassidus explains, I don't know if you were here when I referenced this in the past, that it says that Eliyahu Hanavi was Be'ibur Yud Beis Chodesh. right? That his mother was pregnant 12 months with him. So there's a contrast between Eliyahu Hanavi and Moshe Rabbeinu. That Moshe Rabbeinu, it says he was in Be'ibur 7 months, barely 7 months. Really, it was like 6 months on a drop. And with Eliyahu was 12 months. So what do we find? We find, how does this translate in Avodah? That Moshe Rabbeinu, his neshama was so powerful that his body was not an obstacle. He didn't have to do iskafia, ishapche. He never had to work with his body because it just didn't get in the way. It's like he lived a neshama life. Eliyahu, his body was a big obstacle, and he had to work on himself to, like a lot of iskafia, he had to develop himself. And ultimately, he purified himself to such a degree until it says that his body was Ola B'Sayra Shamayma. His body became transparent. So Moshe Rabbeinu was buried. And Eliyahu Hanavi, because the body was an obstacle and he had to work with it, so he cultivated, he developed, he processed the body until it became like lucide, until it became transparent. So that's the contrast. So here he's talking about the first part, that the neshama is in the state of ibur. Eliyahu represents like ultimate ibur. And then he says, the Alter Rebbe says, it's all neshamas that go through the state of ibur. So that's one inyan. The second inyan is the Alter Rebbe explains in another maimer, also on this pasuk. The Alter Rebbe says that it's important to understand that when a neshama comes down into this world, what does the inyan of ibur accomplish? It connects the neshama, which is purely the Eibishter, to the physical world. And the Alter Rebbe explains, we have to realize that when a person does an Aveira, the soot that affects the person, it's not about the body. It's that the pagam is in the neshama. The whole inyan of Gehenim and all the purification, it's not happening to the body. All the inyan of kafakela, like all of these things are to purify the neshama. The neshama became soiled. How is it possible that the neshama, which is a chelek elokam mimal, how could it become affected? That's what the 12 months, that's what the inyan of ibur accomplishes. It creates an alignment, it creates a connection between the neshama and elam hazeh, so that what the guf does, because the neshama is bihislapshus, the neshama becomes impacted. I just want to write a little note that the shir is happening now. Just a moment. I'm going to write that tonight's shir is dedicated to Rabbi Yoel. Okay, so that's the second nekuda that Alter Rebbe explains. So now let's take a look in the maimer. The inyan of Amida, is Shmeina Esrei. Shmeina Esrei is complete bittul. Before we're actually a Metzias. It's not only with Eliyahu, the kol neshamas the miridasam v'slapshus on the guf. Before the neshama actually comes down, but it's already in a state of ibur, which the Alter Rebbe doesn't say clearly in this maimer, but from the other mamarim, before it's in the nefesh habamis, azai nikru b'nois Yerushalayim. That's when they're called b'nois Yerushalayim. Now remember that in the previous maimer, and the Alter Rebbe will refer to it again, he uses the word alomos. Right? I translated it as maidens. Right? Remember? So the maidens are before they're pregnant. And B'nai Yerushalayim, when are they called B'nai Yerushalayim? When there's when there's conception. So that's the inyan of Amadat Lefonov. Now, why are they called B'nai Yerushalayim? How does Yerushalayim fall into the picture? Shemekablim aleihem bechinas yira shalem. There, at that state, their yiras shamayim is total. Tainu shleimus hayir. And here the Alter Rebbe explains that as long as we're in a physical body, we cannot experience complete Yira Shamayim. We can't have a total bittul. He says, Ki hayirahu mibchinas malchusa yizbarech. What are we? We're in awe. The total fear, the total bittul is from Hashem's kingship. Malchus kol elamim, lamayla adein kates, lamata adein tachlis. There's no place where he can't reach. Think about it. When do people become fearful of a government? When they say, oh, big brother is watching you. Right? There's no escape. Remember, we also discussed that the word yira comes from the word roya. Right? You're being seen. So there's a fear. I have no escape. I don't have any privacy. I don't have a metzias. My whole metzias is bottle. I become a subject. Where does a person feel complete bittul? It's like the Rebbe once, the Rebbe once spoke by, I think it was a sikha. I was there, so I don't think it was a fabringen. The Rebbe asked, it says in Shulchan Aruch that when you wake up in the morning, you have to imagine right away the Eibusher is standing on top of you, and immediately you jump up. So the Rebbe asked, how do you go to sleep? Right? When you lay down in bed, it's too intense. Right? Imagine we would be in the state where every second, Hashem Nitzav Olav, we would feel Hashem's presence. He's sitting on our shoulder. It would be impossible. You know, when in Montreal there was a chassid, Zalman Marozo. So there were bachrim that would stay at his house. So Uncle Ponim, every once in a while, so they lived in his basement, you know, whatever. There were guys that, anyway, every once in a while, they would watch every step, everything he did. It's like, oh, he's such a chassid. We're going to watch everything he does. Sometimes he would just, everybody out of my house. Out. Like, I need a break. You know, like to be watched like that, you could go crazy. So the Indian of Benois Yerushalayim, remember that their name is Yerushalayim, Yira Shalem, right? Shleimus Hayira, they're in a state of complete bittul. That's the neshama in that state. And they experience Hashem's kingship in totality. And it's Lamaila Adein Ketzel Lamata Adein Tachlis. Hashem's reach is everywhere. There's no escaping. That's this nakuda of Maila and Mata. She bechinas ein sof. Now, the Alter Rebbe continues, when the neshama comes down into this world, to be a nivra, to be a physical existence, it's impossible to be in such a state. This also the Alter Rebbe discusses in another maimer. It says in Ashrei we say there are two halves of a pasuk. L'hoidia livnei ha'adam gvureisov, u'chaved hadar malchusay. So the Alter Rebbe asks in one of the Ma'amorim, what's the connection between the first half of the pasuk and the second half of the pasuk? They seem completely unrelated. One is that Hashem is maidia. Hashem lets the human beings know that he's mighty, that he's powerful. And then he also lets them know the glory of his kingdom. What's the connection? What's the connection between the glory, the Hadar Malchusay, and the Gvuroisov? So he explains. The second half of the Pasuk, Kved Hadar Malchusay, Hu Masha HaMalachim Mekabel Malem El Malchus Shamayim. The second half of the Pasuk, those who experience the full glory of Hashem, they're in total bittul. Machana Michal Ba'ava, Machana Gavriel Chulu, Elef Alofim, Veribu Revavis, like the Gemara says in Brachis, the tens of thousands of Malachim, Ligdud of Ein Mispar, there's no end of the battalions. Shekol Zeh, all the bittul of all the Malachim, who Yikar V'tif Eres Gedulas Malchus Yizbarich. This all is an expression of the awesomeness of the beauty of Hashem's kingdom. Look at these thousands, these millions of malachim who are his subjects, and they themselves are so awesome. And all of this is ulahidea livnei ha'adam. What do us human beings get? We only get gvuroisov. Ein ze ella b'bchinas gvurosav. We only get a tzimtzum of all of that. Hein b'chinas hatzimtzumim rabim v'shoinim. Shebiyishtal hamadreges. We get a tiny sliver of Hashem's kingdom. Mashe'ein kein haneshama terem be'elei lemazel islabish beguf. She'ein b'chinas ayin mamash. When the neshama is in a state of ayin, he mekablim aleim el malchus shemayim b'shleimus. They appreciate Hashem's kingship the way it is. B'chinas Esav mamash. And that's when they're called the Nikru B'nais Yerushalayim. Now he brings an interesting thing about B'nais Yerushalayim. There's another pasuk. It says that the Hashem's Kala comes to Hashem and brings along her friends. That's that pasuk in Tehillim. Besulois achareha reoiseha muvois loch. They follow their friends and they come to you. The Medrash says that, like all her friends, they become pilakshim, right? So there's Bas Yerushalayim, that's the wife, and they bring along their friends. Skipping the parentheses, Nikru gamkein alomais, the other maidens, the besulais achareha, the others are also called alomais. Because of alomais ahivuch, they all love Hashem. So who do they refer to? So now he's explaining the pasuk. Hanesham is sheyordu v'nislabshu v'guf nefesh haba mizbeila mazeh. The neshamas in this world, which are he nikra knesses Yisrael, he makar neshamas Yisrael, from their source. What are they called? They're called kala. HaKadosh Baruch Hu nikra etzlam b'shem chasan. Hashem is called their chasan. Why? Because to impregnate them means that he lowers himself. He's mashpia to them. Miloshen chavois darge, to descend. Hu bechinas hamshachas eirin of Baruch Hu b'neshamas. Hainu b'matan Torah diksiv b'yom chasunasei. So in other words, the hashpa, what is the hashpa to the Yidden? The hashpa is the Torah. Sha'oz who's man anisuin. Shekemei anisuin al derech moshel. Bechinas hazivuk. The hayichud. What is the unity, the consummation of the relationship is hamshachas hatipa, hanimshechas min hamayach shel hamashpia, bechinas hamakabel chulu. So Hashem's chokhmah is being delivered to the neshamas. Kach ha'Torah he bechinas chokhmas yirtzeni yizbarech bechinas ein sof mamash chakim v'loy b'chokhma yediyah. Torah we have to recognize is Hashem's seichel. Hamshachazu bechinas ein sof mamash. The Torah is nitfeses v'nikletes b'neshamas Yisrael. So here is the second aspect of the here's the second aspect of the mashal of the chasan and kala, that the hamshachas hatipa, there's the inyan of klita, right? The tipa, in order to have a child, the hashpa of the male has to catch, right? If right, it has to catch, otherwise it's garnished. Nothing, it's a very garnished. There's no vlad, there's no birth. So what does it mean to catch? To catch means that there becomes a process. Once the nukva absorbs the tipa fully, it internalizes it and it's able to do something with it. It processes it. So he says the Torah, what happens with Torah? Torah comes into Yidden, and when it comes into us, it becomes niklat in us. The Torah has to become, right, like we say in Tehillim, that it's, there are a few ways. It says, Uvesoira soy yehage. You have to make the Torah your Torah. Right?
Zekana Chachma.
Right, Kana, Kinyan, right, the Inyan of Kinyan. So So he's saying that's the hashpah of the Eibishter is nitfeses v'nikletes b'neshamas Yisrael. It has to catch in the Neshamas Yisrael. And then he brings that's why there are shishim ribui eisiyas haTorah corresponding to the number of neshamas. Hein shishim ribui hamshachis l'shishim ribui neshamas Yisrael. And then he says, v'lachein amru razal. So just like when I was talking earlier about that Alter Rebbe explains in one of the maimerim that the process of ibur establishes a connection between the neshama and the physical world. So now the Alter Rebbe is saying that the process of ibur for the neshama is what allows the Torah to become one with the neshama. He says, "V'lachein amru razal shemalamdin es hatinog bebeten imay es kol haTorah." Everyone asks the question, what's the purpose of teaching the infant? Why does the Gemara say that the child in the mother's womb is wrapped up and he has a candle and he's learning Torah? If anyway is they're going to cause him to forget it, what's the purpose of him learning it? Right? What's the tayelis? What's the benefit? It says, well, what that's doing is it's establishing a connection. What does it mean when you say, oh, it's familiar? It's familiar means it's going to stick. It's going to connect with me. So that time of the ibur, what it does, it establishes a connection between the person and the Torah. Shemalamdin kidei liyos nitfas v'niklat b'nishmasoi eir v'chayis me'osiyas haTorah. The letters are only letters. In the letters, there's light. The connection between the light of Torah, the Ein Sof of Torah, with the Yidden, that happens b'bchinas ibur. That happens when the neshama is in a state of bittul. Asher amadeti lefonov. Shehein ha'oras Ein Sof baruch hu chakim v'loy b'chachma yediyah. The Eibishter's infinite wisdom. So ve'azai, while the neshama is in a state of ibur, nikra neshamas Yisrael b'shem kala. That's when it's the kala, because that's when it's mekabeles hatipa. That's when it's absorbing the Eibishter's hashpah as the Torah comes down. Ayin be'idrozuta, etc. So I would say the main nekuda so far that the Alter Rebbe explained is really the Alter Rebbe is just setting up. He explained what Benois Yerushalayim are, that there's a neshama that's in a state of bittul. Most of what he developed in this ois was before the neshama comes down into this world, and he expressed that not only by Eliyahu Hanavi, when the neshama it already has an identity, but it's b'bchinas ibur. That's a very, very important moment. It has complete bittul to the Eibishter. It's establishing a connection with Eilam Haza Agashmi, and the Torah makes an imprint. The Torah is able to bond with the neshama when it's in that state. Now let's take a look at Beis. Hine bechinas kalazu. She bechinas knesses Yisrael mocker l'neshamas sheyadu v'nislapshe beguv. This neshama in this level of bittul maimer, it says l'bnei Yerushalayim. Hein neshamas shelo yardu. So here the Alter Rebbe is mechalik. So it's a little bit tricky how let's for the sake of the clarity of the maimer, let's separate now. The neshama is the way they're in a body. Says to the neshama that's not yet in the physical world. Shelo yardu, sha'adayin hem b'bchinas tahira, which are klulos b'matzila b'chinas ayin mamish. So the neshama in the physical world says like this: Im heyos, although. Now we're saying this. The Alter Rebbe is telling this to each and every one of us. A person comes up to the Rebbe, a person comes into Yechidus and he says, Shcheirani, I'm feeling down. I don't feel pure, I don't feel holy. So he says, Im heyes ki shcheirani, even though I'm blackened, mach masiridasi la'elam hazeh, here I am in a physical world. v'slabshusi b'guf hagashmi. And in other ma'amorim, the Alter Rebbe explains that our occupations require being invested. You have to be involved in your business in order to make money. It requires you to really, you have to be uninhibited. You have to let go, and you have to really immerse yourself. And that's the Shechora. Not only am I in this world, but I have to be into it, right? Like a chassid once said, "Nishnar as me'est," but it's a whole taiva. You know, it's a whole taiva. The car, you have to give your car gas, okay, but it's not a taiva. But when you eat, it's a whole discussion. It's a whole. So that's the Shechora.
This is the Shavuk Tzedakah.
Yeah. The Alter Rebbe is going to speak about tzedakah later. Yeah. The Arba Yodas. Yeah, the redemption. Which maimer were you learning?
Dvarim, Beis Chalalim. Tziyam b'mishpat
Tipada, which year? Not which year, but which sefer?
There's one in Lekutei Torah.
Oh, Tziyam b'mishpat tipada from Lekutei Torah. That's the one that you posted.
Yeah.
You posted a shir. I didn't have a chance to just a moment. Let me take a quick look. The first maimer, Tziyam b'mishpat.
I think there's only one in Devarim. Rabbi Citron's also doing it this week, but he's doing a maimer of the Rebbe on it. And he ends off saying, V'shaveha b'tzedakah. V'shaveha is the captivity is the beis chalalim of the heart that are in captivity because they're in the Welt and in Gashmias and worried about Gashmias instead of worried about Gila Lakus.
Right. It says, what does it help you? What does the worry help you? Yeah. He speaks about Daigus here. This is the maimer where he speaks about Daigus.
At the end, maybe a little bit. It was just the finish.
I'm going to learn it Shabbos morning. We learned this one. We learned this maimer. Yeah. Moedim Rab Meir l'chachamim. Yeah.
This is not the first time we're learning Shir Hashirim that's connected to the parsha. Pinchas, Bola.
Yeah.
Especially the white, black on white. Forget it. Many times already. Unbelievable.
So okay. So even though Shechora, nevertheless, Hareini Nova Yoser, I'm more beautiful than you. Yoser mibnei Yerushalayim. Why? Hine inyan Shechora b'bchinas kalo. Where does the blackness come from? Where does the Shechora come from? It's Shechora in the kala, in a yid that's in yearning to Hashem. He says, so now the Alter Rebbe goes back to speaking about the white and black from a completely different place. There's a lashon, I think it's a lashon HaZohar, that Hashem's speaks about Atik Yoimin, right? There's Keser, we refer to Atik Yoimin. The word Atik Yoimin means very old, very aged. So we're imagining that there's Adam Kadmain. For all practical purposes in English, we call it primordial man, right? Whatever that means. And Adam Kadmain, so the Zohar says that the Sar Roishe, the hair of his head, is Ka'amar Noka, like clean wool. Tzemer Noki. And it says he's wearing like, it's Kitlag Chiver, it's like white snow. Right, so here the allusion to white wool is one of the purest forms of white, right? Chazal tell us that there are 4 levels of white, like the shell of an egg, like plaster, right? Like snow and like wool. Kitlag chiver, ke'amar noka, like clean, ben yoimai. When a sheep is born, the pure white. So the Eibishter's Kavyochel, Adam Kadmain, his hair is pure white. Then we have another pasuk in Shir Hashirim, and the pasuk says that kvutzoisov taltalim shechoros, that Hashem's hair is curly and it's black. I would say kvutzoisov are the edges of his hair, like the bangs or the fringes, right? Like by the payas, or like this idea. So kvutzoisov taltalim shechoros, that they're black. So 1 second. The Alter Rebbe here is going to present the question: is the hair white or is it black? Right? Ain't one question. Now, the other thing the Alter Rebbe brings is that we find in Chazal that black, the bird, the crow or the raven, is a black bird. Right? Like Noach from the Teva, before he sent out the yoina, before he sent out the pigeon, he sent the oirev, and it says holich v'shoiv, and then it came back, right? So there's a medrash. Why did Noach send a raven? Like, why was that his first choice? Now the Gemara says that a raven is achzori. He's a cruel bird. There's an interesting thing that it says about the Gemara says that Talmidei Chachamim are likened in order to become a Talmud Chacham, in order to be truly learned in Torah, you have to give something up. Right? What do you have to give up in order to be dedicated to Hashem? So if you remember Tanya in Perek Mem Tes, Alter Rebbe writes that you have to be mafkir everything. Alter Rebbe's lashon there is, remember that? We spoke about it, right? Yeah, lahafkir hakol. Like guf, like mamin, like isha ubanin. You have to be mafkir everything, right? So the Gemara says that Talmidei Chachamim they behave like a achzori, like a oirev, regarding their wife and kids. Someone showed me that in one of the Sfarim of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, so they write that he's such a Talmud Chacham that he fulfills that Gemara. That whatever, it was a little bit alkoponim, but you got to be true to the inyan, right? If you're true to the inyan of Talmud Chacham, so this is the Gemara says that you have to be like an Eirev. So the Medrash. So what does it mean? What first of all, what does the raven do? Right? What the raven does, Hashem created this nature in the raven that sometimes it has a hard time identifying its offsprings. Okay, he doesn't recognize his own kids. And once the bird doesn't recognize the kids, he doesn't feed them anymore. So he abandons them, right? We find one of the birds in the Torah is called chasida, right? Remember that? Ve'eza chasida. Chasida, Rashi says that it's mischased. It feeds the offsprings of other birds. It's not a kosher animal because it doesn't feed its own; it feeds others. Right? Yeah, it doesn't take care of its own. Anyway. So the inyan of the oirev is that it's not mine. I don't. If he recognizes them, he takes care of them. But if something happens, they move a little. I don't know exactly how it works. Then he abandons them. Gendikt. So it's a mashal for achzorius, right? It's a mashal for cruelty, but there's a certain aspect of it that's correct, right? Not to feed, not to give energy to things that don't belong to me. So the Alter Rebbe discusses that there's the white hair and the black hair. The white hair relates to the strands are hamshachis, right? The strands are hamshachis. The white hair are hamshachis of chesed. Yeah, the white hair are hamshachis of chesed. Why what does that mean? In other words, when I walk out into the world, through mitzvahs, I'm able to elevate more and more gashmias. Right? I'm drawing down Hashem into the world. I walk into a store and I say, oh, I could use that for Shabbos. That would be a nice thing in my shul. That's a nice tablecloth for Yom Tov. I could use that for my sukkah, right? So I'm drawing down all that. Those are the wide hairs, the Rav Chesed, that they become like ways to hoist up everything in the world and connect it to Hashem. That's the white hair. Then there's black hair. Black hair is the inyan of achzorius, is the inyan of cruelty, meaning to stifle, to cut away. And the Alter Rebbe gives two mishalim of not to give our energy to where our energy doesn't belong. The Alter Rebbe explains in a general way that there are two types of klippus in the world. And this is also in another maimer. The Alter Rebbe speaks about this much more ba'arichis, that there's some, let's say, in the cycle of a relationship between a husband and wife. So there's 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So b'shas ishtei nida, so she's asur, but there's a heter to the isur. The isur becomes mutter. You have meat without shchita, it's asur, but with shchita it becomes mutter. So there's a process of elevation. But someone else's wife or chazer, you can't elevate. It's very interesting. The Alter Rebbe says, what do you mean? But there's a spark of the Eibishter in that chazer. There's a spark of the Eibishter in that woman. You have to reject it. It's a rachmanis. Why don't you have rachmanis on the life that's in that object, that's in that forbidden object? Says, no, you have to be like a oirev. You have to have a certain cruelty. In other words, that does balangt nicht. That's out of my area of influence. I have to know, like it's not my customer, right? Somebody calls you, whose customer are you? Usually, that you're his customer. That's not my customer. That's one area of achzorius. The other inyan of achzorius, the Alter Rebbe says, is internally. The internal strength that's needed to withhold ourselves from doing what's wrong. That you need a strength of being tough with yourself and not, in Yiddish we say, noch geben, not to give in to every desire. So let's learn it a little bit inside. I think basically we lined up this ice, so it should be quick. We should be able to read through it. He says, K'moshe Kosov, the second to last line, K'futzoisov taltalim shcheiros k'oirev. That Hashem's hair is black like a crow, like a raven. Then the Gemara says, what are taltalim, the curls? The curls are tile tilim shal halachis, the many myriads and myriads of halachas. Shehein kavutzoisov, they're Hashem's bangs. V'chinas v'nimin, the threads and the hairs, hanimshachis min hamayach, v'ribuyas chalkos, there's so many. So too in halacha, in tile tilim shal halachas, hanimshachis mechach meilah, that emerge from Hashem's wisdom, chakim v'levachach meyadiyah, and hein b'chinas shcheiros, they're black. Inyan Yuvan, what is the black hair about? Bahagdim Levair. He neksiv, in the contrast it says, maybe this is also in Shir Hashirim. The hair on his head is ka'amar naka, like clean white wool. They're white. Uksiv. On the other hand, it says, they're black. What are they? White or black? Right? They're hamshachis. Shehein b'pchinas chesed v'rav chesed, infinite chesed. Shenimshach v'nispashet ad lamato, that the light of Hashem is nimshach, k'moshel hasayris, like hair. Shenimshach is ba'erech rav. Vehein tile tilim shel halachos, myriads of halachos, v'dikduke soifrim shebachol mitzvah, and every mitzvah there are so many dikdukim. K'moisha kasuv, like it says in the pasuk in Mishlei, sil seleha, you spin in the curls of Torah. V'ateroi memeka, it elevates you. Pirush silsila. What does silsila mean? Maimer azal. Like the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah, the Gemara says that the Chachamim did not know what silsilah means until they heard the maid of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi telling a young bacher that had a chup that was combing his chup. So she said to him, Ad masai ata masalsil b'sa'arecha. How long are you patchking with your... Right, so that's how they learned what silsil means. Alter Rebbe is very selective in the words that he chooses from that Gemara. He says, "Kamahapech b'sayre." He was curling his hair. Says, yesh sa'aros, but on the other hand, there's hair. Shenim shoches mislabshes b'chinas lavnunis. There's white hair. Hu b'chinas chesed. Shehein ha'halachis harabis shebemitzvahs asay. There are many mitzvahs in mitzvahs asay. The karbonos, all the movement that you have to inspect, all the different details, how long it's eaten, what it has to come with, the hours that you bring it, how much it has to be worth, all these different things. You do smicha, you don't do smicha, right? There's so many, how old it has to be. And then there's in trumais, there's all these different halachis and maiseres and tzitzis and tefillin and Shabbos. Every one of these have myriads and myriads of halachas. Eich tiye ha-mitzvahs nasis. How do we perform the mitzvah? Let's say bekorban. Liyas oila l'ratzon lifnei Hashem. How do we do it right? Reach nechayachu. And it's with every mitzvah. B'chem b'shakol ha-mitzvahs shein hamshachas chachmei la b'bchinas chesed. And this is what I mentioned to you before. Lahaleis hadvarim hagashmiyim. What do? I bring all of these things to Hashem. Ba'asiyason, by fulfilling them, kemitzvason, when I do it right. What happens? I'm mekasher the mitzvah, ba'ir Hashem u'kedushasa. I connect it to Hashem. Vehein hasayris, hanimshachis mebechinas sa'aresha ka'amar naka. That's the white hair. Shu'leivena elyon, v'chesed elyon, the ikra rav chesed chulu. That's the white hair. But the black hair, those are the negative mitzvahs. To separate what I may and what I may not. To push away those things that cannot be elevated. So you can't elevate chazer. This is what the pasuk means when it says black like a crow. There's cruelty. What's the achzorius? He says like this. Even something forbidden. There's a godly chayis. Otherwise, it wouldn't be alive. Even though it has a spark of Hashem, you're not going to bring it to Hashem. It has to be pushed away. It's like cruelty. That's the first type of achzorius, towards the object. Now he brings the second type. You got to be tough in yourself. You have to be meticulous and careful and stick your nose out of things where you're not allowed to be. To really limit yourself, to sanctify yourself. That's why v'lachein nikra. That's why the pasuk refers to it as b'pchinas shchoros ka'orev. This is here. This is the positive aspect of shchorani, and the Alter Rebbe really is lobbying here for the union of Iskafia in a very powerful way. Shchorani shemekabel is b'chinas hatipa. How do we receive Hashem's oyer? B'chinas chachmei la, b'chinas shchora. The way that I receive my connection to Hashem is through the black hairs. The hainu, b'chinas hahalachos, b'dikdukei soifrim, shehein kvutzoisov taltalim shchoros ka'orev. I'm a little bit confused from the different maamorim that I was looking at. The Alter Rebbe will speak about this later, about the order. The Alter Rebbe will distinguish very clearly between mitzvahs asay and mitzvahs lois asay. Right? Mitzvahs asay is the area of white. Mitzvahs lois asay is black. And the Alter Rebbe will explain that the black energy gives us a stronger connection to Hashem than the white energy. If we look at going back to the pasuk of Ole Kedar and Yiriyas Shloimei, that the Ole Kedar, the outer part is the black, the higher part is the black, and the inner part, the closer part, is the white part. Also, I just mentioned one akudah, it's probably to be unpacked later on, is that the Yiriyos, one of the ideas that Alter Rebbe speaks about with regards to Yiriyos is just like the Yiriyos HaMishkan, they weren't only on the roof. They were on the roof and then they hung over, they had flaps that they hung over the Mishkan and they went over the walls. They also covered the walls. Alter Rebbe says the same thing with the heavens. The heavens are not just above us, it's a wrap. It wraps the whole globe. What does it represent? Alter Rebbe says it represents that when a person in totality, every part of us, even our mumim, our averis, Hashem embraces us completely. And so that's the inyan of Ole Kedar, that even our ugliness is also Soiviv Kol Almin, it's able to be soiver. It's okay. It is able to overcome. He doesn't get overwhelmed, right? He's soiver also darkness. So that's one. So here the Alter Rebbe explained one aspect of Shachor is the inyan of Achzorius. Now he brings another inyan. V'gam shchorani. Why am I black? Because I'm connected to a physical world. B'pchinas kiyuma mitzvahs maisius. Shehem b'dvarim hamluboshim begashmias mamish. They're physical. Uklalu sanitzedaka. He begashmias mamish. Chiyuvahu ayidei esek ha'adam ba'elam hazeh. How does a person become obligated to do tzedakah? She'esek b'pragmatia. You have to be involved in business. You got to make money. It takes effort. You got to be invested. When a person is involved in their business dealings, so here he is. He's in Gashmias. Even though shchayrani, even though I'm involved in Gashmias, but Venovo, I'm beautiful. From his hard-earned money, he gives the poor man, and it's chaye nafshay. He could have used that money to sustain himself. Through doing that, he elevates the whole nefesh habahamis. Not only is his neshama elevated, but he elevates this whole part of the physical world. And the Alter Rebbe speaks about that more in the further part. We're going to be mafsig here. I don't know, 1 second, I just want to stop the recording.